All right, so this is chapter 8. We'll talk about the mental status assessment. This chapter also covers some of the material for the mental status assessment assignment that we'll be doing again later this month or something. And I apologize for not having that date right offhand, but this is where you'll find some of that information. Very brief lecture. So in mental status exams, there are typically two categories. There's observational and screener based. Observational is exactly what it sounds like, the observations you see during the therapy room with the client, and they are the 9 categories below. And then screener based is like a PHQ-9 or a GAD-7. PHQ stands for Patient Health Questionnaire. GAD-7 stands for Generalized Anxiety Disorder Questionnaire, 7 questions. And they ask questions like, more than half the days I felt down, depressed, blue. And it ranges from like all the time, some of the time, a little bit of the time, none of the time. More than half the days I felt I had no appetite, I moved so fast or so slow people noticed, things like that. So the screener based asks a specific question and you answer how true that statement is. And then observational, again, is by your clinician's observation. So the 9 categories of functioning for observational mental status exams are as follows: appearance, behavior or psychomotor activity, attitude towards the examiner, affect, mood, speech and thought, perceptual disturbances, orientation and consciousness, memory and intelligence, reliability, judgment, and insight. And so the book gives you this little chart, if you will, this little graph. They talk about hypotheses that go along with each one. So I'll kind of walk through a little bit of what each one would mean. So appearance is exactly what it sounds like. Like if my hair looked like this, and say if my shirt was like weirdly buttoned, like every other button, like this button's unbuttoned, but this button is, you'd say my appearance is disheveled. Like I look very frantic or frenetic. So you'd say disheveled, or you'd say appearance is within normal limits. And if you're in person, you can say, I think there's a word that you can use for like hygiene is not kept. If like you can smell the person, they very obviously look like they haven't cleaned themselves in a while. Behavior and psychomotor activity is basically the behavior. So if somebody is like fiddling with their hands the whole time, you'd write about that. Or if they're tapping their feet the whole time, you'd write about that. Or if everything is fine, you'd say behavior is within normal limits. Attitude towards the examiner is how they are treating you. If they are skeptical or critical of you, if they're compliant and cooperative, so you write how are they treating you. Affect and mood is, it's interesting that they sandwich these together because I look at it kind of differently, but mood is how they are feeling. Euthymic is generally happy. Another way I've heard that said is euthymic is also the absence of a bipolar, manic, or depressive episode, so kind of like in the middle. So I've heard it called neutral, or euthymic. You can say depressed, anxious, sad, angry, whatever it is. And then affect is typically if their words and their expression are similar, if they match. So if I were to say, I'm really sad right now, my favorite pet goldfish died yesterday, I'm really sad. You'd say that my affect does not match my mood. So you'd say my affect is incongruent with my reported sad mood. So affect is more if you're congruent. And then you also have other adjectives like labile mood, where it's like mood is easy to change, or labile. There's blunted, guarded, and restricted affects that are all kind of different versions of like how withholding you are, and that sort of thing. Speech and thought is if the words are coming out at a normal rate, volume, and prosody. If somebody's talking really fast, you'd say like pressured speech. If their ideas and thinking is if it makes sense, you'd say it's like a logical and coherent thought process. But they might talk about one thing and then quickly like sidetrack. You would say then they're having tangential thoughts because they're going from one tangent to another. And then if they're just saying random thoughts that are not related at all, like today I had cereal for breakfast and I have a dog and I go to school, like all those are unrelated thoughts, you'd say that's I think that is disorganized thought content. So again, however you describe the way they're portraying or communicating their thoughts and ideas is either within normal limits, tangential, or disorganized. Perceptual disturbances are if they endorse any type of like hallucinations or delusions. Orientation and consciousness is if they're like present in the room cognitively. So orientation is if you're oriented today, to the day. So if you ask like, what is today? Today is Tuesday. If you ask, where are you? Like, I'm at my house. And if you ask, what are we doing here? Go, we're having a therapy appointment. You'd say oriented times 3. And then consciousness, again, like if they're coherent and like awake. Memory and intelligence are what they sound like. Memory seems intact, or memory for remote events is not intact. Intelligence, again, appears within normal limits of intelligence. Judgment, reliability, and insight are much what they sound like. Did the person make good judgment calls? Like, oh yeah, a stranger told me they had candy in their van. I really wanted candy, so I got in the van. You'd say it's poor judgment unless they're like a small child, perhaps. Reliability is if they are a reliable narrator for their lives. If they're like, yeah, so I flew across the Atlantic Ocean 37 times yesterday. Probably not a reliable narrator unless they're unless they own like a Mach 7 jet or something like that. And then insight is, again, if they're insightful towards why they're doing what they're doing. So the use of status exams are typically only used specifically when there's some suspected pathology. So it could be like a mental health concern, like a delusion or hallucination related disorder. It could be memory or dementia or traumatic brain injury related. Sometimes they're requested by short-term or long-term disability agencies. That's been my most common experience with status exams, is somebody applying for short-term or long-term disability, and then they ask for me to provide a status exam. Typically, they're found in the therapy notes that the clinician keeps. They could be part of a therapy note, or it could be its own entire note. So most clinicians write what's called a SOAP note. Subjective, objective, assessment, and plan are the different parts of a SOAP note. Subjective is like what the person says. So like, oh, I'm not doing too well. I'm really stressed at work. So you'd write, Will said he's not doing well. He's stressed at work. Objective are the things that you're observing. While Will was talking, he started crying and he tapped his foot because he was nervous. Assessment is how their functioning is doing. Like, he appears like his functioning is worsening. He's doing worse this week than he has last week. Like, how are they doing compared to recent events? So you're assessing like if they're progressing or not progressing. And then plan is plan for next therapy session. And I also put in my recommendations in the plan. The plan is next session we will talk about childhood trauma. Between sessions, the client said they will do deep breathing for 5 minutes a day each day. So if we were in person, I would show an example of a mental status observation, what it looks like on Simple Practice, which is the note software that my practice uses, but we're not in person, so I'm unable to show you. Here are the links to the screeners, the MoCA, the MMSE, and the RUDOS. So again, pick one of those 3 and do it with a friend outside of class or in class. We're going to be separated into 3 groups, and you'll each be doing one. So I recommend you spending some time looking at each of them and familiarizing yourself with like how to conduct those screeners. There's a lot of overlap. They utilize a lot of the same questions, a few differences here and there, but at least spend some time familiarizing yourself with that so be prepared for that assignment. And then last, I want to talk about the 4 most common dementias. Just because it's a big thing that we do with these screeners. They help us, and that's what the MoCA, RUDOS, and MMSE help us screen for these things. So Alzheimer's is the most common dementia, so often has impairment in recent memory, difficulty repeating words and sentences. There's significant behavioral and personality changes. And as Alzheimer's gets the most advanced stages, you have significant, almost like no memory for recent events or remote events. Like you forget like who your own children are and things like that. It's one of the most difficult things for family members to have to be a part of. Vascular dementia is due to a stroke or a trans-ischemic attack, a TIA, and the symptomatology is contingent on where the stroke occurred. So if it occurred in your occipital lobe, close to the back of the head, it's going to have some vision problems. If it occurs in your frontal lobe, you might have some executive functioning problems like planning events or hitting the brakes on yourself emotionally whenever you're getting mad and you don't want to say something you regret. But typically includes emotional dysregulation like uncontrollable laughter, difficulty with attention and word finding difficulties. Functioning will have what's called a scalloped projection. So you'll be good, have another event, be bad, worse, be good, and then you only get worse after each stroke. And frontal temporal dementia is associated with speech and behavior problems. So this is when you see older people suddenly shouting offensive terms, or common you'll see men inappropriately grabbing or touching younger women. George Bush Sr. I don't think he had FTD. He had a very rare type of like uh, a very rare type of dementia that presented as FTD. But if George was Senior was seen like groping women during like photos, but at like the age 90, and typically that type of behavior is with FTD, frontal temporal dementia. So frontal lobe and temporal lobes. Again, your frontal lobe is what kind of makes you hit the brakes whenever you're like tempted, or not tempted, but whenever you see something engaging but you know you shouldn't do it, like if somebody opens a cash register and you're like, man, I'm a little bit broke, it'd be really nice to swoop that money. Your frontal lobe says, don't do it. It's not worth going to jail. Somebody with FTD might swoop and grab that money or say something inappropriate or do something inappropriate. Family members have a really hard time with this because they often ask, like, man, is this who our father has been this whole time? Is this who our grandfather has been this whole time? And like, no, like the frontal lobe does so much work to like make us not do these things. Like our brain might have these impulses, these urges, and these instincts, but our frontal lobe is like what makes us people. It's what separates us from animals. So whenever you take that frontal lobe out of the equation, like an FTD, you might have some like very bizarre and troublesome behavior like that. Then last, Lewy body dementia. You often have hallucinations in the later stages of it, but you have difficulty calculating numbers and doing basic math, and you'll have a lot of insomnia. So man, I forget the name, not Get Out by Peel or Key, whoever it was. There's a scary movie about like this kid going and visiting one of their grandparents, and the grandparent was kind of like the spooky monster antagonist throughout it. I hadn't seen the movie, but my suspicion is the grandparent probably had like Lewy body dementia, was having hallucinations and insomnia. So they'd be awake at all times and then like talk about seeing somebody in the room that isn't there. So those are the four most common types of dementias. You can get a little bit of these profiles on the MMSE, RUDOS, and MoCA. You can see some differences, like if they're having troubles with some of the numbers and calculating things, that obviously might be indicative of Lewy body dementia. If they're having difficulty repeating words and sentences, that might be indicative of Alzheimer's, et cetera, and et cetera. So this is why it's really important to be at least somewhat familiar with these screening tools, especially as you or loved ones take these. You can kind of help make sure that we're testing for the right stuff. There are a lot more thorough and in-depth neurological testing to test very specifically for what type of dementia somebody is experiencing, but that's a little bit beyond the scope of like the mental screeners we talk about today. But some of those examples, if you're curious, is like the DKEFS. It's the Dellis-Kaplan Executive Functioning Screener. It's a really, really long test that it does a pretty good job at pointing out like what parts of the executive functioning are intact or not for an elderly person. They can also be used after brain injuries for like people that have concussions. There's another common test called the CVLT, California Vocabulary Language Test, something CVLT, where you do a lot of like word finding, where you ask somebody to come up with as many words that begin with the letter A as you can, name as many animals as you can, as fast as you can, some stuff like that. And again, it kind of maps onto different types of dementias. So there's a lot more in-depth and specific testing, but that is why these mental status screeners are really important, and that's why I think they're really good to include in this class. Anyways, that's it.